Join EWTN on this special on-location presentation as the Catholic University of America and the Napa Institute present Human Ecology, integrating business and 125 years of Catholic social doctrine.
It's my real privilege and honor today to introduce to you our first speaker. No one can dispute, I think, that Michael Novak was one of the first clear, courageously innovative scholars to launch into this area of economic theory and the Church's social teaching. He has done it in a myriad of ways. Certainly, the American Enterprise Institute, which is, goes back, I think, 35 or 40 years, which began this reflection, has just given us hundreds, if not thousands, of articles, of videos, of debates, of discussions that have gone right up into the halls, not only of the United States government, but the United Nations. I mean, just an enormously influential, cross-section between faith, Catholicism, culture, and economics, particularly capitalistic economics. I mean, Michael, we're just indebted for this because I don't know if anyone would have heard of Catholic social teaching in the halls of government were it not for you and the innovations that you courageously adapted many, many years ago. I think everybody is familiar with his book, The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism, which really, again, initiated a whole new area of debates and discussion and innovation in this cross-section between culture, economics, and faith. Michael has also written 45 books, hundreds of articles. Really, I can't think of anyone, just in terms of both scholarship, innovation, and enterprise activity, who's been more innovative and more influential than our first speaker today, the remarkable Michael Novak, and he is incomparable as well. Michael, what a great honor to have you here with us to start out this day.
Father, thanks a million, and thanks a million for a whole lifetime of inspiration for the rest of us. It's been a joy hearing you since you were a very young Jesuit priest. I just want to thank you very, very deeply. And to others of you, I've been writing books since 1960. So added up, that's 55 years. That means there were 10 years in which I let you down. I didn't get a book done. I apologize profoundly for that. It did take a little time to get married and some other things, but well, my subject today is social justice, but I decided to approach it through the joint topic, the human ecology of social justice. And I won't say much about ecology in the beginning because I want to be sure to cover my main assignment, social justice. But let me begin with one of the first mentions of human ecology in papal literature. That's in Centesimus, Annus, paragraph 39. The first and fundamental structure for human ecology, John Paul II writes, is the family, in which man receives his first formative ideas about truth and goodness and learns what it means to love and to be loved. And thus what it actually means to be a person. And in another place he mentions that in the first glance in a child's eyes, he sees the love of his mother, the unconditional love that she has for her or for him, and knows right away, in the first moments of existence. Now, no one denies that the moral climate of the place into which parents introduce their children may give an upward push or a downward push to their children's ability to grow up with good habits among good companions in a culture that encourages the good and the beautiful. A sharp moral decline throughout the culture is deadly to children. President Obama says that global warming is the greatest threat facing our generation. But the moral ecology in which human beings live and move is more important for their well-being than the ecology of the biosphere. Now let me move into the question of social justice and indicate to you why the very invention of the term creates a problem about moral ecology. The term social justice was called into being very late in Catholic history. Only in the late 19th century, and only by indirection there, and in the early 20th century, finally explicitly. What delayed its emergence? What new developments changed the climate of the time enough to demand the new term? And what other new terms had to be invented to explain what social justice means? It didn't happen all at once. The need for something like social justice was dimly perceived by Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum on the New Things, 1891. Then 40 years later, in Quadragesimo Anno, Pius XI took a first stab at defining this new concept. It took well into the 20th century, in other words, for the concept to enter Catholic thought. Now, true enough, the term had been used in the 19th century by some more or less obscure theologians like Luigi Tapparelli, and it entered into the background thinking of Leo XIII and others, but it really never became fully into focus. Thus, the question occurs, why did this term social justice, so crucial to contemporary papal social thought, and indeed to the whole field of social work, arrive only at that time? Why didn't it appear in earlier centuries? The clearest and soundest answer is that the human ecology necessary for the practice of social justice was not yet sufficiently developed. The ground was not yet prepared. Necessary institutions were not yet in place. The necessary definitions and distinctions had not yet been worked out. The climate was not supportive. For example, before social justice could be practiced, there needed to be an era of widespread, if not universal, education. There needed to be an era in which economic and social initiative was frequent. There needed to be an era in which freedom of association was common. Before the era of attention to associations, such achievements had not yet been won. For instance, Tocqueville wrote that at the time of the French Revolution, there were not 10 men in all of France capable of practicing the arts of association, of associating themselves with one another to accomplish a social task. Not 10. In the quite different circumstances of North America, with its very weak states, learning the skills of association was the only alternative. And when the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth, there were no Holiday Inns waiting for them. There were no churches from the 9th or 12th or 15th century waiting for them. Anything they wanted, they had to build. And so on out across the country. In my wife's family, there's a diary of the first member of the family to reach Iowa. First Europeans to plow the soil of Iowa, about 1841. And in his diary, he keeps talking about the importance of the individual to the founding of America. But that's not what he describes in the other pages. Page after page is, this week we've been building a home for the Georges. Or we're This week we've been putting up a bridge over the creek. Or this month we're working on the church. It was all together. The great story of America is not the individual. The great story is building communities, thousands of communities out across this country. We don't get credit for that. We're the most communitarian people on earth. And we discovered, as Tocqueville pointed out, the art, the habit, the principle of association. He said in France, when people have a need or want something done, they turn to l'État, the state. And in Britain, they turn to the aristocracy to do things. And in America, lacking these, people have to turn to one another to do them. In the year 1872, there were more than 72 universities and colleges in the state of Ohio. For Easterners, that's not to be confused with Iowa. There were more colleges and universities in the state of Ohio in 1872 than in any country on earth. In fact, in the whole of Britain and in a good part of the continent as a whole. And they were all put up at that time by private citizens. Churches most often. And I'd love to go on and explain why and so forth, why that happened. But one sentence is because they knew from a very early period, having learned from Adam Smith, that the cause of the wealth of nations is intellect. And if you're an undeveloped country, you need all the discovery and invention you can get. And if you can, as Lincoln put it, if you can find someone who can draw 4 grains of wheat where only 2 had been drawn before from a stock, you've got somebody who's doubled the wheat supply of the world. Now, Paul Adams, my colleague, and I discovered in a book, Social Justice is Not What You Think It Is, that the original social justice does not fall under the categories you might think of. By social justice, do you mean the 8 Beatitudes? Well, they're all very important. They changed the world, in fact. For the first time in history, humans began on a large scale what the Jews had already started. In Deuteronomy, true religion is the care for the widow and the orphans. And this carried it further, to care for prisoners, to visit the prisoners, to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked. This tremendous humanistic impulsion to Western life, the first hospitals, the first orphanages, the first universities, all this came from Christ. And is expressed in the imperatives of the worldly imperatives, if I may put it that way. Care for one another that are expressed in the Beatitudes. But that's not what social justice is. Leo XIII was pointing to new things required for a new time. And that's not quite what the Beatitudes are. It's something more than that. And I don't know if you watch what people mean when they talk about social justice. Remember the nuns on the bus in 2008, 2012, and they defined themselves as what? Social justice Catholics? Well, what are social justice Catholics? Just look what they ask for and what they do. I'm not knocking it at all, but mostly they want to spend more government money. They ask for more funds to be distributed by government to help the poor. Important and maybe necessary. But that's not what Leo XIII had in mind. And is social justice come under the genus of ideals. It's a pattern of ideals for what we want the perfect or near perfect society to be like. Is it a vision of utopia? No, not at all. Because the popes knew from the beginning that most human beings are sinners. And if you're going to build a social order for human beings as we are, you better build it for sinners, because that's about all there are. There aren't enough saints in the world to build a republic. And the ones there are very difficult to live with. Any family with a saint has at least one martyr, too. So what social justice, this new virtue that Leo is calling for, he didn't even figure out how to name it yet. He was tempted by social charity, he was tempted by social justice, but he knew something new was needed. Leo XIII saw incredible vision that one of the greatest transformations of economic life in human history had taken place almost unnoticed in his century, in the 1800s. For 1800 years, the main language of Christianity was agrarian, seeds and tares, olive trees, sheep and goats and shepherds, figs, grapes, the mustard seed, wheat and wine and fishing nets. The work in which nearly all Christians had for centuries been involved was agricultural. Now, quite suddenly, impelled by rapid population growth, people everywhere began fleeing from agriculture to seek, because they're starving, to seek work in the new urban world, a world at first of small industries. It took well into the 1800s for there to be factories employing more than 20, 30, or 50 people in France. A little faster in Great Britain, but not a lot. Small industry mostly. So this great transformation had severe effects upon family life. And that's why Leo thought the church had to get into it. Because the main transmitter of Christianity was the family. The main nest of experiences from which Christianity explained itself. Father, Son, Mary. You're kidding me. 10 minutes, you're kidding me. I'm just getting started. Okay, I better hurry on. In politics, too, for centuries, Christians had learned to conduct themselves as subjects of lords, of kings, of emperors. When my grandparents came to the United States from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they were no longer subjects. They were citizens. Their all duties were simple: pray, pay, and obey. That's not good enough in the United States. If something was wrong, who was responsible for it? They were. If they needed a change in working conditions, they better organize and work for it. And the first successful founding of the United Mine Workers was a group of Slavs in Eastern Pennsylvania. So it's a wonderful story, and I wrote about that too. But anyway, so the great transformation in economic life brought about a great transformation in family life and a great transformation in political life. And then, with all the new inventions, radio, even newsprint, even the quick-drying magazines like Time magazine that could be mailed out and reached across the country in 3 or 4 days, revolutionized communication. Then on top of it, radio, loudspeakers in villages throughout Europe, spreading the new ideologies, the new political philosophies. And then television, and the internet and cell phones, which had a tremendous influence in the 1980s. All these came into being and developed a whole new world of consciousness in which new types of people entered to change consciousness. The symbol makers, the ones who started telling new stories. What is a man? What is a woman? We're in the middle of transforming those notions all across the developed world, and that's practically everywhere now. All these things are no longer given, they're being invented, and with not altogether wholesome motives. So on the one side, Leo XIII feared the excessive individualism of utilitarianism, of relativism, and what they were introducing into the moral stream. And on the other side, he became aware that there were powerful movements of ideology to extend the power of the state, the great collectivist state. There was as yet in 1891 no example of socialism institutionalized. But already, very early in the Rerum Novarum, he argued, and he argued from wonderful common sense, that socialism was useless, bound to fail, and evil. And he gave 13 reasons why it was bound to fail. While John Stuart Mill and other intelligent people were predicting the coming golden age of socialism, the new paradise, not Leo. And I was in a seminar in Eastern Europe shortly after the fall of socialism, when a group went through these 13 reasons and said, one by one, they all were true. Everything he said worked out. I wish I had time to go through this, but I don't. Now, Leo was looking for a way to defeat the isolation of the atomic individual and the fall into relativism. And on the other hand, to prevent the rise of a collectivism based around a motto I first saw, 12-foot-high neon signs along the river in Moscow. The essence of socialism is the abolition of private property. What's the abolition of private property going to do for the church? Who's going to print its Bibles? Who's going to spread the word? Who's going to interpret the meaning of that word for today? Who's going to compare what's happening today with what that word says should happen? You're going to lose the press. You're going to lose your means of communication. And he just couldn't bear to have that happen in the century. So he was called later the Pope of Associations. And that's what he meant by social justice. Social justice was a virtue, a habit, a disposition, which had to be trained into people. Tocqueville said it didn't come natural to the people of France or anywhere else to join together to do things. It did to the Americans out of necessity. But we were an exception there too. And what it did is it turned isolated individuals who couldn't build their homes and their barns and the bridges and the schools, couldn't do it alone. It turned isolated individuals into political animals, social animals, who learned the skill of looking around, seeing what needed to be done, inspiring others, leading others to do them. Oh, Americans are incredible people. I remember when Eugene McCarthy ran for president in 1968. And kids all over the country were inspired to go clean for Gene and come and help organize. Well, 400 kids would come from all over America, come to New Hampshire, and by God, in about 2 or 3 days, they had it organized. They all had Rolodexes and knew how to use them, and telephones. Americans know how to organize. Well, that's what Leo XIII was pointing to. These habits of association that turn naked, lonely individuals into political animals, into social animals, who don't require the state to do everything. And one of the great, what Anatol Sharansky calls the anti-totalitarian axiom is, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and to God what's God. Meaning, not everything belongs to Caesar. And that's crucial. If we lose that in America, how do we get to the principle of limited government? Everything belongs to Caesar? Okay. Now, labor unions, how did they get built? By bright, brave individuals at first. Building associations. What I'm trying to say is social justice is not partisan. It doesn't belong to the left. It doesn't belong to the right. It belongs to those who diagnose what's wrong and organize and do something about it. That's what we're doing in this program. That's what NAPA does. That's what the Catholic University of America does, if I may stress the most important word in the title of our sponsor, the Catholic University of America. Did you get it? The Catholic University of America. You can't get off campus unless you know that. So, okay. Now, my colleague Paul Adams has done a lifetime of social work. He's from the UK, but he worked mostly in America, including in Hawaii. And what he contributes to our work is to show how a professional field like social work has come to understand most of the principles of Catholic social thought by experience. Now, it doesn't carry through on those, it doesn't articulate them, it doesn't have a theory of it. But social workers learn in a couple generations that if you just take over and do things for people, you're not really helping them. When you leave, they're just as helpless as before. The only way you can help long term is to introduce habits and dispositions and skills so that people learn how to build human communities from the ground up and learn what works, in short. It's not enough to have good desires. It's not even enough to have good feelings about helping people. What matters is what actually changes, what stays, what makes a difference. And that's what social workers work at. And Paul goes through a whole set of techniques that they use to check on themselves and to make sure that their best practices keep altering in accord with the lessons they learn from practice and keep altering the methods. And Paul was quick to notice that Catholic thought had worked out the theory of much of this in a way that was very useful to social work. It had given a theory for the different relationships and the different... Okay. Now, the last thing I do want to talk about, I want to return to the notions of human ecology. I'm going to skip. Am I here? I'm going to skip a little bit. The word sounds a bit cumbersome, but let me break it down a little bit for you. Moral ecology, or human ecology, operates on many different levels at once. And let me sort out 5 of them just to give you a taste of what's involved. It's a very complicated work of theory to work all this out. think, first of all, of the stories people tell themselves about what human life is for. Think of the story of Jesus and how that revolutionized the West. Christianity is formed not so much by laws, by a set of abstract principles. It's formed mostly by stories, by narratives, which carry through the tone, the emphasis, the human content of behavior, not just the abstract rules. Yeah, there's so many things in life. It's not exactly what you say that matters, but the tone and manner in which you do it that matters. You can say so many more things that are tough if you're polite and non-threatening. Anyway, it's pretty clear. Well, the classical story is the Christian story for our era, and how it transformed the meaning of our care for one another and the institutions that we need to build to care for one another, which were never found on earth before. Even the very movement, though it took centuries to make real, declaring slavery to be evil, that was carried through first and only by Christianity. And we're not at the end of it. There's a lot of slavery going on earth today. But pretty well, Christianity and other things too have helped to make it really difficult to defend slavery. You may practice it, but to get up in progress and say, we believe in slavery, not too many world leaders are going to be in that position. Okay. But now, to move to the second point, we have a new problem with ecology. Not just telling what the narratives are that shape our civilization, what good is and what evil is. This is going to be the fastest 1 minute in human history. But we have all these other artificial stories being told. And immense confusion about simple things. You know, it says in the top of the Bible, man and woman he made them. I mean, if you don't get clear on that, it's going to be a mess. Well, it's getting messier and messier, isn't it? Okay. But you do have to see how artificially the narratives that move us are made today. And made for all kinds of motives beyond the good of the human race. 3, you need to analyze the institutions through which things are done. I've used the example of the way the people of America throughout the Middle West, beginning in the East and throughout the country, have built communities, generally without much of a state. You know, they had to build these communities before there were states and before there was a federal state. We had about 200 years of community building before we had states. Then we have a world in which me has become so important. Get mine now. And where the grossest of pleasures moves front and center. I'm thinking of the pornography, which is so easily accessible, and which, believe me, 14-year-olds all across this country have gotten into. And it's not a good way to learn about sex. It's really not. It was more fun in the back of a car and safer. And what that's doing to the way people think about one another and what they think about life, this is a whole new world. I mean, the moral ecology in which we live and move and have our being. Well, then the long-term vision of where we want to be in 50 years. That's a whole different issue, also part of the ecology. In other words, if you can talk about ecology, you have to go through systematically a whole set of areas. And I apologize for taking so long, but I did my best.
Thank you again, Michael, and it is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Christopher Wasserman. Christopher is also going to be discussing this area of justice. He's going to be talking to us about gift and justice in economics and in business. He's uniquely qualified to do this because he's in both areas. He has started a foundation called the Ecophilos Foundation, which is dedicated to showing the complementarity of respect for human beings and success in business. He's also started and continues to be the president of the Dermot Summit, which comes from the Dermot Foundation, which teaches CEOs and other executives about the complementarity between ethics and success in business. So he's all over what Michael's been speaking about on the higher level of social justice. Additionally, he is definitely an entrepreneur himself. He has started his own company, I believe it's Thermolab, which is dedicated to constructing and engineering and researching the creation of surfaces through thermal spraying. In addition to it, of course, he's been very much involved in speaking all over the country in this area, and of course brings to us a lot of insights, both for us here in the United States and internationally. A real pleasure to introduce to you Christopher Wasserman from Switzerland.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you to the organizers to invite me. Thank you to Andreas Widmer. Thank you for Father Spitzer to be here, because if you don't understand my speech, he will summarize everything at the end. My speech has 3 parts. I like the number 3 as a trinity. The first part will be a short testimony on my life, my private life, because I believe as a leader you don't want to have a divided life. You need to talk a bit about, I need to talk a bit, I don't like to talk about myself, but I'll talk a little bit about myself. Second part would be, how do we make sure that in my company, part of my strategy is actually working on the Catholic social thought. How do you integrate that in your strategy to make sure it happens? And third, I will talk about, on a more macro level, what can the Dermot Summit, or what do I believe the Dermot Summit can do to change the way our economy works. Tough program. So let's start with the testimony. I was born and raised in a Swiss entrepreneur family of 4 generations, and I was actually working in that company for many years, when suddenly in '91, something happened that really changed my life. Believe it or not, in safe Switzerland, I was kidnapped. And that ordeal lasted 1 night. What was interesting in this event, in this ordeal, was not so much the details, but the signs that accompanied what happened. God and the angels really helped me, save me that night. Let me explain briefly, because we don't have too much time. I was actually handcuffed and thrown in my car and driven all the way across Switzerland to France, which is just opposite Lake Geneva where I live. And I decided to escape and jump out of the car as the car was actually moving. And what happened is, I'm not very fat, luckily enough. I jumped out of the window, back window, but the driver closed the window as I jumped out, so I was hanging outside the car. And the first miracle was that I didn't hit my head as I was being dragged outside the car, but I fell forward. The second miracle was that as I fell on the pavement, I rolled, and I was, of course, wounded. but I could just run away and escape. The third miracle was that they tried to reach me. There was a few people who were after me for a ransom, and they tried to look for me, and they followed the bloodstains on the road, and they actually didn't find me. And the fourth miracle, I would say, was many years later. During the judgment of one of the kidnappers, I was actually standing next to him in the men's room, and he actually asked for forgiveness, which I thought was also an incredible sign. Now, that night, without knowing it, and I come back to Dr. Kennedy's expression of Saint Irenaeus yesterday, where he mentioned, the glorification of God is to be fully alive. I guess I was not fully alive up to then, and that was for me like a wake-up call, because I realized I needed to put purpose in my life. And after that, I had many blessings. I think there's a saying which says, you have as many blessings are superior to the ordeal. You get more blessings than ordeals. And I think I can say I'm the living proof of that. So why am I talking about this? Because this has helped me in trying to give purpose to my life. And after this kidnapping, I started my own company. I left the family business. And now I will start and talk about this part of the presentation. But I think we are all gifts. My presentation is the gift and justice. I think we have the greatest gift, which is our lives. So, to go back now to the second part, I was very influenced by the writing of John Paul in Laborum Exercens, which is an encyclical letter which was written between Rerum Novarum and Centesimus Annus, where he writes a lot about the importance of work and how work can help us become better human beings and construct us as human beings. I was also very impressed by the work of the Holy Father Benedict on his encyclical letter, the gift, Caritas in Veritate, or Logic of Gift. And so I'm doing a little free promotion here for my friend Andreas on his book. Okay. I hope you all read this book, The CEO and the Pope. It's very, very interesting reading on leadership issues and how can you as a leader, how can you learn, how exemplary you have to be. I will not ask you to memorize all these slides, so on some of them I'll go quite quickly, but I will also use some work which has been done by a group in the UK called the Blueprint for Better Business. This was started by Cardinal Nichols in the UK, and a group of bankers. I don't know if there are many bankers here, but the banking industry hasn't got the best reputation nowadays. And actually, they've been working on how to develop a framework to guide decision making. Some big companies such as Unilever are part of this movement, and some smaller companies such as mine, which is an SME, also part of this movement. And actually what they've done is they've been working on 5 principles to make sure your company has a purpose, and also to integrate behavior, the right behavior. Because I guess if we're talking about justice, we're talking about gift, obviously it starts from the top of the company, the board, starts with the CEOs, exemplarity. So I'm not going to ask you to memorize this other slide too. Then I'll talk very briefly of my company. And don't worry, I will not make a sales pitch. It is the best coating company in the world. And what we do is we actually are in the recycling business. We apply ceramic or metal coatings to different components, which you see on this slide, which goes from gas turbine components, aircraft engines, biomedical components for the orthopedic industry. And the technology we use is thermal spraying. This was developed by a Swiss, by the way, last century, where we take a ceramic and a metal and we put it through a plasma torch. This heats and accelerates the particles. Okay, that's enough for the engineering part. Basically, what this technology can do, it can apply coatings to surfaces and improve the lifetime of machinery, avoid unplanned downtime, and save precious materials. So, how did I apply, as part of my strategy, the social responsibility? We call it corporate social responsibility, but I tried to integrate also the Catholic social thought. First, in the mission statement, mission is not only about making money, it's also, what's the purpose of the company? And integrating the human factor as part of our strategy, as part of our mission and vision. This is also a lot of things on this slide, but I will come back to this and give you some examples. How are we doing with time? Okay. We tried to integrate in our strategy several things that you see on this slide, to be, of course, a responsible and responsive employer. I guess that's priority number one. Second, to be honest and fair with customers and suppliers. And third, to be a good citizen and a guardian for future generations. That's not so easy to do. And deliver a long-term purpose. And what is interesting here in the value is basically the behaviors. You can see these are typical points that you find in the Catholic social thinking, but translated in a way that people understand it. If I take just one example, subsidiarity. It's not an easy one. It's actually freedom and responsibility. Freedom with responsibility. And I'll give you a few examples of what I've tried to do in my company. And so what we've done is we've also established a roadmap over the last 3 years, of the next 3 to 5 years, where we integrate an action plan on these different directions. I'd like to come to one example of what we've done. This is a movement that started in the US. It's called the Benefit Corporation. It's about a couple thousand companies that are part of this movement now. And basically, it's actually pushing you to change your bylaws. In some states, the legislation has changed in the States, I understand, in Europe too. And it's actually making sure that you really integrate some of these issues in your corporate strategy. And so we're probably going to be a B Corp by the end of the spring for 2 of my companies. Now, some examples. How do we do this? I mean, how to make this work in practice? And I can tell you, it's a journey. It's no easy answer. And I don't have all the answers. I have some answers for my company. So bear with me. So first of all, I think it's creating the right environment, a certain transparency, sharing information in the company, financial information, KPIs, directions, vision, mission. People have to know where you're going. What are your values? What do you stand for? Other examples have to do with some of the examples, some of the more specific things. When we talk about freedom with responsibility, that means getting the workers. I have blue-collar workers and I have engineers. Obviously, workers know a lot more than some of our managers because they're doing every day a certain work with their heart, with their conscience. And, we work in a rather high-tech industry, and obviously quality standard is a very important thing for us. And so the worker has a huge importance in how to produce quality. We try to bring them together, to listen to their ideas, to actually encourage them to volunteer ideas, to apply some of the ideas they bring up. So these are things that we're not the only company to do, but I think it's important that people feel that they can make a difference. Every person in a company can make a difference. Building trust and trusted relation. If you want justice, obviously there must be trust. And I think one of the reasons why we're in a tough period right now is that is lack of trust, in companies. And I think Benedict talked about this in his encyclic, Caritas in Veritate. How do you build trust? It comes from the top. Obviously, if you're not trustworthy, you can't expect people to trust you. And that means that you need to walk the talk. It means you need to say what you do and do what you say. And that's not easy to do because you're working with dilemmas, We've been involved in some Eastern countries where they use bribery as a typical way to do business. Well, we've said we don't want to do that. We've lost business. That's part of the decision. It's what you stand for. Obviously, you need to be able to, how could I say, be coherent in your values and behave in the way that you're coherent to your values. I think what is important too is about, to go back to the idea of justice. There is just wage. I don't think you can have a trust if you pay your people below average wages. You know, that seems to be simple enough, but that's part of the story. You need to pay people above market, or you need just wage. You need to have just prices for your customers. Now, what is a just price? You can argue about that. Basically, it's important. You need a just return for the shareholder. You know, I think the shareholder, in my case, I've reinvested most of the money in the company to make it grow, which doesn't mean you don't need a return, but it has to be just. It has to be in relation to the other stakeholders. Just prices for the suppliers. If you try to squeeze your suppliers and put them out of business, it might not be the best way for your suppliers if you press them on prices all the time. And then, of course, paying taxes. We're talking about with Sir Renoir, is also the other European speaker who you will hear later on. You know, many companies don't pay taxes. And that's part of I think that's part of the responsibility of each company to pay their taxes. So, I think I'd like to finish very quickly concerning leadership, basically, because to go back to this theme of justice and gift, I think it has to do with leadership, as I said at the beginning. And I think in those times where we live today, spiritual leadership is going to be even more important. Why is that? And I tried to explain this in this slide, is that life is uncertain, so we need to be patient. Life is cyclical, so we're going through dark times and chaos. We heard it from Mr. Beigel yesterday evening. But that doesn't mean there's no hope. And I think after that, it could be a way that new ideas emerge and new leaders emerge. Meaning or purpose is what motivates people, of course, in organizations. And the role of the leader is to remind that. To remind where we're going, what is our vision, where we stand. Service brings joy. I like that one. I think I'm in a service business, and I think if you do your work well, there is joy. There is satisfaction. And courage comes from the heart. I think today we have a lot of solutions available, but we don't always apply them because it takes courage. It takes courage. And these stories come from the heart. They don't only come from the mind. At the end, we're all interconnected, so that what one company does has an influence on the common good, obviously. And I think we should rely on human goodness, on the good side of people, which doesn't mean everything is good and fine. But we should rely on hope, reliance, and love. And I don't think we should be afraid to speak about love in the corporate world, which is not the case in many companies. We need peace of mind and heart. So if the leader is not in peace of mind, and I must say I myself can be very stressed some days. What I try to do every day is to start the day peacefully, to pray, to slow things down when things get too hectic, to take a pause, be mindful, and to expect surprises, because life is full of surprises, right? And also to say thank you. I think that's important. Say thank you to the Lord, but also to the people who work with you.
Absolutely.
Right? So, last 5 minutes outside my company now, talking about the Dermot Summit. So this is a meeting where we were privileged to have His Eminence Cardinal Turkson at the first edition in 2010. The goal of this meeting was to bring together leaders who have an influence in their companies, SME or large companies on the stock exchange, and where the goal of the Dermot Summit, I'll come back to, let me maybe say who is behind it. So it's a foundation, so not for profit. We held it in Zermatt because we think it's a very nice place It's a clean place. It's kind of an iconic Swiss village. And why do we do this? Is because we think the current economic model is unsustainable. We think it will crash very soon. We can see some of that. I hope I don't get you upset if I say that, but you could see that the current economic system is not working anymore. You could argue about that, but that's what we believe. So what do we want to do? We want to try to use the power of business, to harness the power of business to work for the common good. What does that mean? Basically it means that by bringing companies that have been able to combine, generating profit but also working for the common good, you can encourage others to do the same. That means that finance should work for the economy, not the other way around. That also means that economy should work for the common good. It also means that the common good should work for the person. And that is possible. And a lot of companies that we've invited have been able to do that successfully. Some of them are family businesses. Some of them are from the large corporate world. And how do we do this? We have testimonies of leaders. That's important, the personal side, because personal responsibility is obviously a key. But we also try to invite companies with new business models. You probably heard about social entrepreneurs who are actually working who are sustainable economically, but also solving social environmental problems. You heard about Patagonia, maybe in the US, where they're doing clothing, sportswear. There's a few companies here, there's a few companies in Europe. And these are new models which are growing, creating employment, and are very interesting. But also traditional companies can play a role. And what is unique about this meeting is I think we do talk about the spiritual dimension of leadership, which I've been to business school, and normally I haven't been to this prestigious business school, but I've been to New York University, and you never talk about that side of leadership.
That's true.
I think we also have everyone actually getting involved in this meeting. It's not top-down. I think it's bottom-up, and people are talking and have ideas. And we try to also have an impact and have some practical projects come out of this Dermot Summit. So we've helped some entrepreneurs. We've had some ideas better known to others that are working in companies, so they contact each other and learn from each other. Yeah, that's it. I think I'll just end by saying we are in the world, but as Catholics, Christians, we should not become of the world. Thank you very much.